is coming to an end. Man, did we load that song into the timer? What we did? Okay, that was like perfect. It just happened that way? Man, God is good. Hi, good morning. You know what's cool about being the pastor is you can flirt with your wife from up here. Gentlemen, if you want to get brownie points, just go to Song of Solomon and just screenshot something and send it to your wife. Solomon had game, man. Not kidding. Good morning. Good morning. Easter is less than 30 days away. Somebody say, what? Easter is less than 30 days away. It's coming upon us quick. And I've been thinking about Easter a lot, just like diving into it and just studying and reading and listening. And, you know, Easter is so much more than we give it credit for. And that's weird because we're Christians, right? Like Easter is like Super Bowl Sunday. And we hold Easter in a pretty high esteem, and it's even more than we even think about it. It's so much more. And so this month, as we head into Easter, we're going to spend some time diving into Easter, Holy Week, what God was doing, the connections to the Old Testament, not just the Old Testament laws, but also the prophecies. We're gonna look at the curses that were broken, even the misconceptions that we may have about Easter. We're going to do a deep dive into absolutely the most incredible day in history, in my opinion. And we're going to do that to prove this thought. Easter is for everyone. Easter is for everyone. Sometimes we believe that it's only for the people in this building, but when you look at Scripture, Jesus died for everyone. And so if that's the case, then Easter is for everyone. And so with that, let's jump into it today. I've already gotten the clock from one person who will remain nameless this morning, but we're going to get into it. So open your Bibles to Matthew 27 with me today. Matthew 27, and we're going to be jumping right into the middle of everything. How many of you guys like movies that start with like absolute chaos, and then they back you out of that and show you how you got to that point? Does that make sense? I love when a movie starts like that. I love it when it starts with like, you're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And then they're like, well, hold on, I'll tell you. That's kind of how we're going to operate. We're going to jump into Matthew 27, and by this time, Jesus has been arrested and he's been tried, not just by the Jews, but also by Herod and by Pilate. So he's been basically through 3 trials. All of them were false, right? Nobody had anything against him. Nobody could prove anything against him. And yet all of them are like, yeah, we don't know what to do with this dude. Peter has denied him by this point. Judas has unalived himself. And Jesus is well on his way to the cross. By the time we get to this point, Jesus is well on his way to the cross. But something interesting is about to happen. And if you were starting the movie at this point, you'd be like, tell me more. What's going on? And so when we get to this point, we meet this completely unknown character who's here for a few verses and then he's gone forever. And so let's read it together. Matthew 27, verse 15 is where we're going to start. It says, now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner who was named Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah? For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: don't have anything to do with this innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. And they answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. As I read this story, some things become very, very apparent to me and very, very clear. One of the things that I really struck me that feels so relevant to today, they say, "What has he done? Give me some truth, some proof, or some evidence." And the crowd has nothing but to yell louder. You know, we live in a time where people think the louder you are, the more right you are. Right? I don't have to have facts. I'm speaking very loudly right now. And this, there's no proof in this. There's no truth in this. There's nothing but loudness. And Pilate, compelled by that noise, goes against what God would have him do. He washes his hands. Now we know, because we see the story, that this is honestly this is the truth. This is what God has coming, right? This is what Pilate is. This is his part in the story. But from an outsider's perspective, if you were sitting there, you'd be like, you don't have anything. You have no reason to flog him. You have no reason to crucify him. You have no reason to be doing what you're doing. Somebody say, "But God." But God. And our message today is called "Our Atonement" by the Romans. The Romans played a gigantic part in our atonement. Judas played a gigantic part in our atonement. And again, we'll look at it from the outside and say, I don't even understand what's happening right now. I don't even know why. There are probably people who are like, how can they be doing this? And so we look at it and we see this is our atonement by the Romans. I want you to turn with me today to Leviticus. We just read Matthew, and now we're going to jump all the way back to Leviticus, chapter 16, verses 1 to 10. And as we read this, I want you to think about how closely this story plays out to the one we just read. Ready? "The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, who died when they approached the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, 'Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come wherever he chooses into the most holy place behind the curtain in front of the atonement cover on the ark, or else he will die. For I will appear in the cloud over the atonement cover. This is how Aaron is to enter the most holy place. He must first bring a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He's to put on a sacred linen tunic with linen undergarments next to his body. He is to tie the linen sash around him and put on the linen turban. These are sacred garments, so he must bathe himself with water before he puts them on. From the Israelite community, he is to take 2 male goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. Aaron is to offer the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and the household. Then he is to take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord, the other for the scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. But the goat chosen by lot as a scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord and be used to make atonement by sending it into the wilderness as a scapegoat. Did you catch that? Did you catch that? There's several things that are happening here that verify that Jesus is our atonement, that Jesus is our scapegoat, and that Jesus' death is our atonement for sins. First thing I want you to notice, there's always two. There's always two. Leviticus 16:5 says, from the Israelite community he is to take 2 male goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. Matthew 27:16-7 says, at that time they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd gathered, Pilate asked them, which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah? 2 goats, 2 Jesuses. Now, very rarely do you hear him called Jesus Barabbas, right? Because that's confusing for people. Wait, there's 2 Jesuses? There was 2 Jesuses. Jesus was actually a very common name at that time. It literally would probably translate to Joshua today. So it wasn't like Jesus was this name that wasn't out there. This was a name that was used. And when we look at this story, there's 2 Jesuses. Jesus the sinner and Jesus the perfect, the Messiah. And they're casting lots in the Old Testament to see which goat would be sent off and which goat would be sacrificed. And we're going to get into that in a second. But there's an atonement that needs to be made. And an atonement means making amends, reparations, or satisfaction for a wrong, injury, or sin. So one of these goats is going to go away, and one of these goats is going to be sacrificed. And I hope that we're seeing the parallel here, because the Day of Atonement, if you don't know, the Day of Atonement was one time a year. It was the only time the priest was allowed to go into the Holy of Holies, but he had to wash himself, he had to cleanse, he had to do all these things. And then he was paying for the sins of the whole world. So here we see the Day of Atonement, and then we see what's happening with Jesus. And the second thing we need to know is that a decision must be made. Like I said, they were casting lots. Leviticus 16:8 says, he is to cast lots for the 2 goats. One lot for the Lord and the other for a scapegoat. And then Matthew 27:21 says, which of the 2 do you want me to release to you? Asked the governor. Barabbas, they answered. So they were casting lots, or they were asking the crowd, make a decision on what's about to happen. Notice, this decision is not up to whoever's in charge. This decision is being left to other people. The lots that were being cast. Have you guys ever seen this? Have you ever seen how this plays out? Casting lots is a unique thing, and we hear it talked about all the time, and we kind of understand it. But casting lots was drawing marked stones or sticks. So they'd basically have a container, and in that container would be sticks or stones, and one of those stones or sticks would be marked. And then what they would do is they'd reach in and they'd say, all right, Deb, it's your turn. You reach in and you grab a stick, and she pulls out the stick and she gets the one with the marking on it. You're the new apostle. Right? That's how it worked. That's what they did. Or in this case, they would have marked sticks or stones, and they would say, all right, this is for this goat. And they'd reach in and they'd grab it and they'd pull it out and they'd say, all right, goat. And the goat didn't understand. They were just happy to be a goat. But this decision had to be made. It was a process that functioned kind of like a sacred lottery. They removed human bias from the decision making. And they divided land. They used it to choose leaders. They used it to solve problems. They used it for all kinds of things, where basically they said, well, we're going to put this in the Lord's hands. I don't want to be in charge of making this decision. So either they didn't want to, or they didn't have any revelation on the decision, so they went casting lots. This was literally Israel's way of deciding when no godly direction was given. So we see this process play out actually over 70 times throughout the Bible. You can see it 70 times throughout the Bible where they cast lots. Joshua dividing up the promised land. Matthias taking Judas's spot and among the 12. Roman soldiers dividing up Jesus' clothes. Right? They cast lots for his clothes. And it's a strange tradition that we see. Kind of like the strange tradition of releasing a prisoner. Right? There was no justification for that, but we'll get into that in a minute. And it reminds me that God can use our strange traditions for his glory. You know, we think that this American Christianity is the only way to do it, but I promise you it's not. I promise you the way that they serve God and the traditions that they use and the customs that they use and the way that they do church in Africa is vastly different than the way that we do church here. And that's even different than the way that they do it in Asia and the way that they do it in Italy and the way that they do it in Canada even. It's different because our traditions are different. Right? And God isn't afraid of our traditions, right? He says don't mix it with paganism, right? He says don't mix these things, but God can use an Easter egg to save someone. God can use a Christmas tree to bring someone to salvation. Well, I don't see those things in the Bible. That is correct. But he's not afraid of those things either. See, he will use what we do for his glory. I want you to understand that. We don't have it right, church. Let's just get that clear and off the table. We don't have this whole thing correct. But he does. And he will use our broken sticks to make straight lines right back to him. Okay? So birthday candles, God can use that. Right? And all of these things, he used statues of kings that were supposed to bring honor to the king to bring glory to his name. So he can use our stuff too. And when we look at casting of lots and when we look at these traditions, the decision needed to be made, and we're looking for this decision to be made because atonement had to be done. And the best way to make those decisions was to cast lots, and Pilate did it in a different way. Pilate basically said, I'm washing my hands of this. I don't want anything to do with this. You guys choose. And so he cast lots in a completely different way because he was Roman and he probably didn't understand the tradition. So he did it, but he was asking the wrong people to help him choose a godly decision. Church, be careful who you ask to help you. Okay? Be careful who you ask to help you. You know who in your life is driving towards God, and you know who's driving towards their own ambitions. And we get confused sometimes. I had somebody ask me the other day, well, if you know, why are all these people rich and powerful and doing all these things if they're not following God? I don't know. But I know I don't want anything to do with what they're doing. I'd rather be broke following God than rich following somebody else. So be careful who you ask. Don't look at the outside appearance. Don't look at what appears to be success and say, well, I'm going to ask them about godly things. You might ask them how to build a 401k, but don't ask them about godly things. Ask godly people about godly things. And don't allow their circumstance to dictate their godliness. Because God might have them living in that box for a reason. Right? And I promise you, the people that are following God, you can tell who they are. They look different. They sound different. And so be careful who you ask for, because if Pilate had just gone to the 12 and said, look, you know this man better than anybody. What is going on here? He might have had a different perspective on it. But instead, he asked the people who were bringing him to be crucified. He asked the people, why are we doing this? We don't know, just do it. They had no justification. They said, just do it. So Pilate's decision was not to serve God, it was to save his conscience. Church, don't make decisions to save your conscience. Don't make decisions to do what feels good to you. Do what God wants you to do, even if it feels tough. Especially when it feels tough. God is going to ask you to do things that are hard to do, not because he wants you to suffer, but because he knows that you can do it. God knew what was coming. He saw it from creation, so he turned it for good, but Pilate could have made a decision that would have made history. So are you making decisions that will affect you today, or are you making decisions that will affect your eternity? Right? We love to live for today. We love to live for this moment. We love to live for our flesh, forgetting There's a whole eternity that we have to live through. And I promise you that eternity is a whole lot longer than what we're experiencing now. And it can be a whole lot better or a whole lot worse. You get to make that decision. So how do you make that decision? Are you trusting God or are you trusting people? Moving on, number 3, there must be a sacrifice. Guys, when sin entered the world, sacrifice became a must. There had to be a sacrifice. Look at Leviticus 16:9. It says, Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. Okay? So there's 2 goats. They got 50-50 chance. And those goats are sitting there with their hooves crossed. Just kidding. They have no idea what's going on. And Aaron pulls the thing, and he looks at the goat, and he says, come on, buddy. And the goat just goes. Matthew 27:22, what shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah? Pilate asked. They all answered, crucify him. Jesus just goes. He knew exactly what was happening.